Mutual recognition of professional qualifications.
Yes.
Audio-visual services.
I believe so.
Believe so. Digital services.
Yes.
Intellectual property.
Again, I believe so.
Energy.
Yes.
Mobility and social security coordination.
Yes.
Very good. Participation in programs such as Horizon Europe and Erasmus.
Yes.
Thank you. Participation in the EU's Copernicus satellite program.
I don't think we're going to be participating in Copernicus.
You don't. And what about technical barriers to trade, such as marking and labeling?
Yes, they should be addressed.
They should be addressed. So I think of all of those, the one that you said you don't know is mutual recognition of type approval for automotive products.
I don't, but I will get onto it and see if I can give you an answer before the end of the hour.
Well, that would be fantastically helpful. I'm extremely grateful to you. Can I just ask one other question before I turn to colleagues about infrastructure? It has been reported that the Sevington inland border facility won't be ready until February. Is that correct?
We hope that it may be ready in time, but we have alternative facilities at the Ashford Waterbrook site, which should be sufficient.
Yes, if I may, CDL. So the position is that Sevington will be ready for the 1st of January for the purpose of traffic management, which is one of the purposes that it is being prepared for. You are correct to say that for HMRC functions, i.e. transit and other HMRC functions, we will be using Waterbrook for the month of January, but Sevington will be ready for traffic management purposes from the 1st of January.
And by traffic management, presumably you mean parking up lorries to handle the flow?
What I mean is, if there is disruption and it is required for that purpose, yes.
Okay. Are there any other sites which you had hoped would be ready by January the 1st that won't be ready in time?
No.
There are no others, right?
There's no others.
And have you now come to a clear decision and put plans in place for the inland border facility for Holyhead?
Yes, we do have plans, and it is the case that Lord Agnew has been in negotiations with the owner of the appropriate site.
Yes,
okay.
HMRC and Welsh Government colleagues have been working on that. No announcement has yet been made, however.
Well, that was why I was asking. Okay. And lastly, it has been reported yesterday that the Ports Infrastructure Fund was quite considerably oversubscribed. Are you going to review the amount of money you're making available? Because some of the ports that didn't get what they were hoping for are very disappointed. And is that going to impact on their ability to do what's necessary?
It's certainly the case that there were some ports that received less than they had hoped. Other ports were happy with the amount allocated. In some cases, I think the most conspicuous example of a port which expressed disappointment was Dover.
Yeah.
But much of the infrastructure that Dover sought to bid for was infrastructure that would not have been in place anyway until I think around 2023. And we're continuing to work with Dover in order to make sure that appropriate investment can be secured for that additional infrastructure. Another port which understandably expressed disappointment was Portsmouth, and it is the case that we're looking with colleagues in other government departments to see if we can find other ways of providing the appropriate infrastructure that the Port of Portsmouth and the local authority believe is required.
And finally, from me, following up the question I asked you in the House earlier, Mr. Gove, how soon after the text of any agreement, if one is reached, is available, can we expect to see the legislation, the detail of the legislation that will be required to give effect to parts of it?
We hope within a couple of days.
Couple of days. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Secretary of State. The Prime Minister has made it clear that the United Kingdom will thrive whether we have a free trade deal with the European Union or whether we trade on WTO rules or Australian style. Would you agree with the Prime Minister's Secretary of State that we will thrive in either case?
Yes.
So, given that, we know that trading on WTO rules ticks all the boxes from the referendum. It returns control of our trade, returns control of our laws, and returns control of our borders. So why haven't we opted for that, given that we are now on the 17th of December, and the European Union said the latest date an agreement could be made was the 31st of October?
Well, we want to make sure that if we can secure a free trade agreement, we do. You're quite right that at the moment, the most likely outcome is that we will leave on WTO terms, that we will have an Australian-style outcome. But of course, a free trade agreement, removing as it would tariffs on UK exporters, is certainly something to be desired. And of course, were we able to secure the agreement that we want to, we would be the only country to have a zero tariff, zero quota, only third country to have a zero tariff, zero quota trade agreement with the EU. And on the whole, though obviously not at any price, securing free trade agreements with other countries is a good thing. Our colleague, the Secretary of State for International Trade, has managed to conclude more than 50 free trade agreements during the course of this year, all of which I think are win-wins for the UK. Secretary
of State, I've lost picture. Secretary of State, if you're still there.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, we're here.
Hello.
Can you hear us?
Oh dear, we've lost the link.
Hello.
Well, Peter, we can still hear you.
Let's try again.
Hello.
Can everyone hear us?
That's okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear.
Peter, can you?
Hello, sorry about that.
No, don't worry, don't worry. Carry on.
Somehow somebody managed to intervene on our call from outside, which we don't want to happen. Given the circumstances of the fact that the 31st of October was the due date, nothing has changed in relation to, there's nothing new. So why on earth have we not concluded a deal or accepted that there will be a no deal? Nothing has changed between now and the 31st of October that could possibly have changed anybody's mind. It's just that either the EU won't say what its final position is, or the UK won't. I mean, it's not fair on business that we carry on through such a lengthy period. So why are we carrying on when nothing has changed? Why are we carrying on if there's no new developments?
Well, the process of negotiations has managed to narrow down areas of difference. And it's certainly the case that there are fewer areas of difference now than there were in October or indeed in July. The areas of difference are still significant. We might have an opportunity to go into them, and they do go to the very, very heart of the mandate, which you quite rightly refer to, which the country gave the government in 2016. But again, if we can secure a free trade agreement, that would be preferable. One of the other things I would say, of course, is that overall, and there are divergent views in business, I think a majority of business voices would prefer a free trade agreement to not. But again, businesses are also getting prepared, are very prepared in most circumstances for whichever outcome we have, whether or not we secure a free trade agreement or not. As we know, we'll be outside the single market and outside the customs union, and businesses have got ready for many of the steps that that will entail.
Yes, Secretary of State, that's absolutely correct. But on the 31st of October, if you had said that was the absolute deadline, all the things that you've talked about that have been agreed after the 31st of October would have been agreed on the 31st of October, because there is no fundamental change in either the UK's position or the EU's. And all we've done is make things worse for business. And it does look to me that it's a little bit silly that we're carrying on and letting business down like this.
Well, I can entirely understand your point of view. I think it's the case that business would rather that we went to the extra mile. That's certainly the Prime Minister's view and my view. But of course, we'll know by the 31st of December definitively, because at that point, the transition period ends, and that is a fixed point in law.
Thank you so much, Secretary of State, and I wish you and Lord Frost every success.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Peter. Nigel Mills. Nigel.
So that's a fixed point of law, Secretary of State. Does that mean there are no situations where talks would continue past the end of the year, that if there's no deal by then, that's it, for a long
Yeah.
time? Or...
Yes.
So that's absolutely certainty. There will not be any agreement next year. We wouldn't go back to the negotiating table.
Yes, I think it's been the view has been expressed by some that if there is no agreement by December the 31st, that we would go back to the negotiating table a month, 2 months, or in 3 months' time. That would be it. We would have left on WTO terms. It's still the case, of course, that there would be contact between the UK and European nations and politicians, as one would expect. But what we would not be doing is attempting to negotiate a new deal. No.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a few questions about the level playing field? I mean, is that the stickiest point of the negotiations, or has a way through been found on this now?
There are 3 areas, I think the committee knows, which are particularly sticky: the level playing field, then what's called governance, or the capacity of either side to take retaliatory measures if observance of the level playing field is considered not to be adhered to, and then fisheries.
So which one's the most sticky? I mean, the media reports that ways through have been found on level playing field and enforcement. Is that the case?
Well, there's lots of media reports and lots of speculation, but I must maintain the integrity of the negotiating process and the confidences that are there. There are some things, understandably, that have been agreed, and I mentioned some of those to the chair. But I'll do my very best to provide additional clarity. But what I can't do is provide a minute-by-minute update on what's been happening in the negotiations, because you'll appreciate that a serious attempts are being made by good people on both sides to find a resolution. But I can say a little bit more about what the nature of the problem is, if that's helpful.
Okay. Please do on level playing field. Yeah.
On level playing field, the particular issue that we have had difficulty with is a presumption on the EU side that if the EU were to diverge from where we are now, if the EU were to produce new rules, regulations, directives, and so on, and they were to be adopted at a European level, and the EU then felt that their adoption of these new standards meant that there was an impact on trade or investment, that they could then take measures against the UK, tariff or other barriers, in order to try to re-level what they might have considered to be an unlevel playing field. And from our point of view, it's wrong to have a situation where the EU say to us, you must follow our rules and regulations, which we've adopted autonomously, or we will deny you market.
in the UK?
We need to be able to legislate, and I think it's vitally important that Parliament does. And the time for legislation may be constrained, but I think it's vitally important that Parliament has a say on the arrangements that we reach, if we are fortunate enough to be able to reach arrangements.
If the worst happens, there is that gap, what reassurance can you offer for trade and for security cooperation until we manage to get that legislation through? Is there no interim policy there?
Our approach is that we will need to know if we have secured an agreement in time to allow Parliament to have its voice and its say and to legislate. And if we don't have time for that, then the clock has run out, and no agreement will have been reached, and we will be in a world who will be trading on WTO terms.
Thank you. Is there any possibility that there are areas of the provisional sort of things that have been agreed that would need to be approved by different parliaments within the European Union? And can you see any issues with their ratification process as a general, a full agreement, or would it be a mixed agreement?
It's always possible that there can be potential issues, but I think it will be a full agreement that the European Council will agree, and obviously all the member states will be represented in the Council. That is my hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Jane. And now turn to Seema Malhotra. Seema.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gove, and to all who are giving evidence as well. So I just want to make one brief point, which is that, Mr. Gove, you said that the majority of businesses would prefer an FTA. I won't ask you to comment on this, but I do think that you'll know that is probably an understatement in terms of what the mood is with business and the urgency for getting clarity about how we move forward. I want to ask a very specific question, though, which you may have covered slightly elsewhere, but is it possible that there would be a temporary situation between the end of transition and either a deal being approved or perhaps entering into force? If there is that gap, what do you plan to happen?
We don't intend there to be a gap.
You may not intend, but if there is one, what would you plan to happen? How would you expect that gap to be bridged?
We will make sure that we have an agreement and that Parliament can vote on it. Or if there's not time for that, then we must accept that there won't be an agreement. And we are, as I've explained to this committee before, prepared for those consequences. And as I pointed out to Peter, we are ready to take advantage also of the opportunities that life at the end of the transition period will provide.
Thank you, Mr. Gove. I would like to just ask for clarity as well. When you say Parliament will have its voice and its say, how long do you envisage Parliament to have its voice and its say for in this process?
On a personal level, I think I'd like the maximum amount of debate, but ultimately it will be for Parliament itself through the usual channels and through the Speaker and others to decide for how long it sits once an agreement has been reached. But in my view, even though, I don't mean this frivolously, even though it's obviously inconvenient for members of Parliament, I'm sure all of us, certainly all members of this committee, would want to have as much time as possible, consistent with the rules of the House and respect for its staff, as much time as possible to look at the legislation and to review the deal that's been agreed.
I am grateful for that, because I do think that is correct, that parliamentarians would want as much time as possible. But if I could come back to your comment as well, that you give a chance of a deal at this point, a less than 50%
yes.
likelihood. In the event of no deal or a period without a deal in force, will the government reciprocate the EU's proposed contingency measures on aviation, road transport and fisheries?
We're looking very closely at those. We regard them as a step forward. I don't want to preempt decisions that might be made either by the Secretary of State for Transport or by the Environment Secretary, but I think you can legitimately conclude from this committee that we take a very positive view of reciprocating those positions, but a final decision must rest with those other members of the government.
So individual departments may make individual decisions. That's interesting. And what's your understanding of the EU's contingency measures? Are they able to be reciprocated individually, or would there be expectation that they would be as a package?
Well, I think it's important to say that in particular, when it comes to aviation and road transport, we too take a more positive and benign view. Fisheries, certainly the position as articulated by the EU is a cause of greater contention, but we'll approach these in a pragmatic way.
Just finally, Mr. Gove, will the government be offering any potential measures of its own with a view to the EU reciprocating if such a situation arises?
Well, one of the things that we have done is that we've said, for example, that we're going to stagger import controls and indeed SPS checks for the first 6 months. The EU have not said that they would do that. We respect the fact that they're a sovereign equal and that is their choice. I think it might be the case if we do get to a situation where we are moving to WTO terms, that there may be other announcements from the EU. But again, the EU has been clear that its approach on aviation and that is a sovereign decision for the EU. But of course, in the event of WTO terms, if they make other sovereign decisions that help us and help our businesses, then we will be constructive and pragmatic in response.
Thank you, Mr. Gove. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Seema. Now turning to Joanna Cherry. Joanna.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gove. I want to ask you about the absence of a data adequacy decision from the European Union. I think I'm correct in saying that as of the 7th of December, the United Kingdom has agreed to observe existing regulations, including GDPR, but as yet the European Union is not reciprocated with an adequacy agreement. And of course, the European Court of Justice have previously voiced some concerns about the UK's handling of personal data. And there is a considerable suspicion of our Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act on the continent, where some people see it as akin to the overreach of United States surveillance powers. So really the position is this, isn't it? Although the UK is already aligned with data protection law, there's no guarantee that the crucial data adequacy agreement will be granted.
No, it's the EU's own decision. It's what's called an autonomous process. So technically and properly, it should be seen as distinct from negotiations over the FTA. And we haven't received that adequacy assurance. I'd say three things very quickly. Firstly, as you quite rightly point out, we're fully compliant at the moment. It should be straightforward. It hasn't proven to be so. The second thing that I would say is that we take data protection as a government very seriously. And the final thing that I would say is that I don't want to, what's the word, jinx proceedings, but I'm confident that there will be a way of ensuring that adequacy can be agreed.
But if there, in the absence of a data adequacy agreement, that would have pretty major implications for business in the UK and for law enforcement, wouldn't it?
Well, I think there are two important things to distinguish there, which you quite rightly do. When it comes to security, I'm confident that we can have robust arrangements in place. When it comes to business, then of course it's the case that business through the use of standard contractual clauses can provide itself with the legal assurances that it needs in order to be able to exchange data safely.
I just wonder about your confidence about robust security arrangements in the absence of a data adequacy agreement, because this morning the Home Affairs Select Committee heard evidence from expert witnesses in law enforcement that in the absence of a data adequacy agreement, any contingencies we fall back on are likely to be slower and more bureaucratic. Now, that would tend to suggest that they are not as robust as you seem to hope. Isn't that right?
Well, it's certainly the case that a number of people have scrutinised the range of security, law enforcement and justice tools which membership of the EU provides, and raised a number of questions, but we're working through all of those questions in order to make sure that the UK is secure. And of course, there are other steps that the UK can take outside the European Union to improve security at our borders as well.
Indeed, but I wonder if we can look at one particular example that the National Audit Office highlighted last week, when they said, they reported that the Home Office is planning to remove all SIS2 data from the Warnings Index, semaphore and border crossing systems on the 31st of December. And this morning at the Home Affairs Select Committee, the Director General of Operations at the National Crime Agency confirmed that that is the case. Now, that means that we will be removing from our border systems the details of more than 40,000 criminals and suspects who are wanted abroad. I mean, that's a pretty serious state of affairs, isn't it?
Well, the Schengen Information System is the one system which would absolutely, if we were to continue to have the same level of membership of, require CJEU jurisdiction. But there are alternative ways in which we can make sure that we maintain border security and indeed augment it.
But you see, the alternative ways aren't as good as Schengen too, aren't they? Are they not? Because we heard, for example, this morning at the Home Affairs Select Committee that these 40,000 names of criminals and suspects that will be removed on the 31st of December, the UK have asked our EU counterparts to upload these to the Interpol database, but we don't yet know how many of those 40,000 have been uploaded. That's right, isn't it? So it isn't fair, it isn't accurate to say that fallbacks such as Interpol will replicate Schengen 2. They're actually less robust, aren't they?
I think good people can differ on that, but I think one of the things that I would say is when it comes to security cooperation, and I say this in no boastful or jingoistic spirit, it is the case that European nations gain just as much from the excellent work of our agencies and our law enforcement agencies as we gain from them. So broad cooperation.
That's a very interesting general statement, but I'm interested to hear more in specifics, Mr. Gove. Yes. And this morning, when this issue was being discussed at Home Affairs, at their select committee, evidence was heard from Deputy Assistant Commissioner Richard Martin, who's the lead for Brexit at the National Police Chiefs Council. And he said that Interpol is not as satisfactory or as robust, to use your word, a system, because with SIS2, if you come across a hit on the system, there's a legal mandate on the state to act on that hit. But with Interpol, it's a voluntary requirement, so the standard is lower. Now, he's the expert, he's right, isn't he?
Very brief answer, Mr. Gove, if you don't mind.
Yes and no.
Right, you might like to clarify that by dropping a line to the committee, actually. But anyway, thank you very much, Joanna. Stephen Kinnock. We can't hear you, Stephen.
I'm ready to play.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I unmuted myself there then. Yeah.
Okay,
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gove, and thanks also to our colleagues. The government's own reasonable worst case scenario, which was published back in September, said that 40 to 70% of trucks travelling to the EU would not be ready for new border controls, and that this would lead to queues of up to 7,000 port-bound trucks in Kent and associated delays of up to 2 days. Is that still the government's reasonable worst case scenario? So we're going to have 7,000 trucks laid up in Kent for delays of up to 2 days. Has anything changed since September to change that reasonable worst case scenario?
Things have changed since September to make it more confident that that won't be the case, but a reasonable worst case scenario is always there to help with planning. And the whole point about it is that it's certainly within the bounds of possibility. It's certainly therefore something which a prudent government would take into account when planning. That's why we've acquired the infrastructure that we have. But without, again, wanting to jinx the future, we're a little bit more optimistic than we were 2 or 3 months ago about the likelihood of avoiding the reasonable worst case scenario.
So let's assume then 7,000 trucks in Kent and delays of up to 2 days. What sort of message do you think that sends to businesses in other countries that are potentially thinking of investing in the UK, that our television screens are going to be filled with queues of trucks laid up in lorry parks for 2 days?
Well, it is the case that we've seen disruption to traffic in Kent before, sometimes as a result of industrial action, sometimes as a result of other events. I think that business people will be well used to the idea that when you have a new state of affairs, there are always a couple of days or a couple of weeks before we reach the new normal. And I think that the fundamental decisions that people will make on investment in the UK will depend on the regulatory, the taxation framework, investment in infrastructure and investment in skills. My judgment is that business people, while of course conscious of news and political events, make their judgments on investment on the basis of sound long-term trends.
Thanks very much. And just to clarify there, you think this issue with the 7,000 trucks and the 1 or 2 days, that will only last for a few days in January, or is it going to go into well into 2021? Are we looking for this scenario to be alleviated by the summer? How long will this be going on for?
Well, again, and it's an understandable take on things, it is not a prediction. We plan for the worst so that we can be ready to deal with it, but the projections in a reasonable worst case scenario are not the main case. They're not the base case which we expect to happen. Again, it's very, very difficult to make accurate predictions, as we know, when there are so many variables. But I think I've said in another forum that I would expect that we would find that after an initial few days and weeks of potential disruption, that things will resolve themselves into a new normal relatively early in the new year. Because again, the risk of the disruption that you quite rightly draw attention to flows from businesses, traders and hauliers not having the necessary documentation. And we and members of this committee have played a part in this, have sought to make sure that traders are ready so that the risk of disruption is reduced.
With permission, may I just add also to say, of course, that for those traders who are not ready on the 1st of January, there will, of course, be much support from government helplines, webinars. We'll continue running those to make sure that those traders can get ready as quickly as possible so that before they attempt to send goods across the channel, they are ready. Because, of course, it is the level of trader readiness which ultimately determines whether and for how long disruption might continue. If I may say one other thing, I think the committee will know that we've introduced a web service called Check an HGV is Ready to Cross the Border. This is mandatory for hauliers who are taking goods across the short straits to use. What they do is they use the service to certify that the correct documentation is in place, and that issues with them with a Kent access permit. We had committed to sending that service live this Monday. We did that. It is operational, it is working, and indeed haulage firms are already using it to get their Kent access permits. And what we hope that will do is make sure that a lot higher percentage of trucks that arrive at the ports in Kent are ready and can make therefore a successful crossing, thereby avoiding that disruption.
Thanks very much. I'd like to change by quite some degree now to talk about Erasmus.
It'll have to be the final question, sorry, Stephen. So
thank you very much. Yeah, I was quite surprised to hear you say, Mr. Gove, at the start that in response to the chair, that Erasmus is covered under these negotiations. You gave the clear impression that it's all sorted and therefore we would be able to continue to participate in a programme that I think most people feel adds a tremendous amount of value and benefit, both in terms of British students going out and learning new skills and languages, and also EU students coming here and getting a great impression of our university system and of our society, and it really enhances our soft power. So I think most people feel that it's a good thing, and yet Michel Barnier made it absolutely clear to MEPs on Monday that the United Kingdom will be ejected from the Erasmus programme. Can you just confirm that that is the case, that we will not be participating in Erasmus?
Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and we are considering which EU programmes we should be part of in the future. And again, I think when we're looking at both Erasmus and Horizon, there are different judgments about their value to the UK, but we're looking at those in the round as part of the discussions.
Okay.
Why then do you?
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair.
I do apologise, Stephen, but
yeah,
we've
no
almost run out of time. Just a couple of final things from me, Mr. Gove. The government talks often, in the event of no deal, on the UK leaving the transitional period on Australian terms. Can you just confirm that Australia does not have a trade agreement with the European Union, does it?
It trades under WTO rules.
It trades under WTO rules. Fine. It does have, however, a mutual recognition on conformity assessments, certification and markings with the EU. If we're leaving on Australian terms, are you saying that you think the EU would give us the same mutual recognition on those issues as it gives Australia?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the EU has already made some unilateral decisions in anticipation of our leaving on Australian terms. I can't accurately predict which other consideration it would give, but the point about an Australian-style exit is that it's not symmetrical with the relationship Australia enjoys. It is very, very similar. When we talk about a Canada-style deal, it's not exactly the same as CETA. It's very, very similar. And one of the things that I would say is that, for example, the provisions that the Commissioner talked about on aviation and on road haulage are provisions that, for understandable reasons, don't extend to Australia. So they're not entirely coterminous, but they are very similar. They're twins, but not identical twins.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, you've made it very clear why the EU's original proposals in relation to the level playing field were not acceptable, because the EU side could decide that the level playing field had become unlevel, so to speak, and therefore could impose tariffs or countervailing measures. But can you just clarify, since the key issue is who decides whether unfair competition has resulted from any divergence, that is the question, would the government be prepared to accept an independent arbitration mechanism determining whether in fact the level playing field had been tilted one way or the other?
That is potentially possible, but a huge amount depends on what the arbitration panel is being asked to decide. Again, by their very nature, judges look very closely at the terms of which a question is put to them, and that is why, if there were to be the resolution of this issue through arbitration or dispute resolution panels, then we would need to be certain that the basis on which they operated and the judgments that they were going to make were appropriately fair and serious.
Now, appropriately fair in theory suggests that you want to know what the outcome's going to be before you agree to an arbitration mechanism.
No,
Have I got
quite.
that?
Pardon? No, not quite. In essence, if an arbitral panel is being asked to judge whether there is for the sake of argument, a potential or possible impact, that's very different from an arbitration panel being asked to decide if there is a real, material and significant impact.
Right, the difference between potential and actual. Well, that concludes the session. I think we have kept within the hour that you set. I hope that the compensatory mechanism will be your willingness once again to appear before us once we know what is in any deal, if one is concluded. And could you pass on from the committee our best wishes to David Frost and his negotiating team, because they've been working extremely hard, and speaking for myself, I hope very much that they are successful. That concludes the session. Order. order. Right, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room. Portcullis House, the Boothroyd Room.